Hamas and Fatah celebrate the signing of their reconciliation agreement in Cairo. Is it really the end to 4 years of rift and division, good for peace, or will it hinder negotiations? Who is likely to be more isolated in the future, Israel or the Palestinians? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. Finally, after 4 years of rift and rivalry, the two Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, signed a long-awaited reconciliation agreement in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, on Wednesday. In a ceremony attended by representatives from the UN, the EU and the Arab League, both factions' leaders, as Mahmoud Abbas and Khalid Mashal, met face-to-face for the first time since 2007. They announced that the black page of division has been turned forever and that the only Palestinian fight is against Israel. From Cairo, Raya Rage has this report.
In the same room in public, for the first time in 4 years, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas leader Khalid Mashal. After signing a deal that ended their rivalry, the emphasis on Wednesday, Palestinian statehood.
Ending the divisions comes at a defining moment in our patriotic journey, when the Israeli occupation has escalated its repression over the past years, assaulting our people and property, taking a pretext from our division, steering us away from establishing peace. At the same time, an international consensus has been achieved, supporting the Palestinian people's right to establish their own free, independent and sovereign state.
Our aim is to establish a free and completely sovereign Palestinian state on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, whose capital is Jerusalem, without any settlers and without giving up a single inch of land and without giving up on the right of return.
One after another, representatives of the Palestinian factions who came to Cairo to celebrate their historic agreement vowed that ending Israeli occupation was now their common goal. After being split between two fighting governments since Hamas overran the Gaza Strip in 2007 and left the West Bank in the hands of the Palestinian Authority, with the new pact, Palestinians will be united under one government. The road ahead involving not only standing up to Israeli pressure, but also ironing out many details.
We have to establish the committee established before concerning PLO reforming, the government, the internal Palestinian reconciliation, the security affairs, and others. These will be the next step.
Both sides have shown signs they are willing to compromise, but the task of agreeing on members of their unity government is not expected to be an easy one, nor is the process of integrating competing security forces, or more so, ideologies.
So the next stage is when the real difficult work begins. Egypt says it's confident there's enough political will to see the deal through. It also says it will be there every step of the way to ensure that the terms of the agreement do materialize. Rawi Ragah, Inside Story, Cairo.
Well, the reconciliation agreement commits the two factions to a series of steps. Let's just take a moment to summarise those steps. First up, the creation of a joint provisional government, which will be assigned to preparing presidential and legislative elections within 1 year. Secondly, the creation of a central electoral commission. Thirdly, a Supreme Council for Security. Then a commission for the reorganisation of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organisation, to include Hamas under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas. Now, both sides also agreed to release all political prisoners and to convene the Palestinian Legislative Council, which has not met since Hamas seized the Gaza Strip in mid-2007. Furthermore, they both agreed that only President Abbas would handle any and all peace negotiations with Israel. Well, it's a big development, a big deal in a bitter dispute. And to take it on, I'm joined by our three guests from Cairo: Gamal Abdel Gawad from the Ahram Center of Strategic Studies. Our second guest from Cairo, Mustafa Barghouti, the head of the Palestinian Initiative. And lastly, joining us from Jerusalem is Yaakov Katz, military and defense analyst from the Jerusalem Post. Okay, gentlemen, it was an unexpected move, that's for sure, and brokered by Egypt. Gamal Abdel Gawad, if I can come to you first of all. Where do you think this came from? It was certainly out of the blue, wasn't it? And how did the new regime in Egypt achieve in what, 2 months, what the previous administration had failed to do in years?
It is Egypt. This is the two sides agreed, in fact, to have Egypt to be the location for the signing of this reconciliation deal. But let us here remember that the two sides signed the same document that been prepared or negotiated and mediated by Egypt late in 2009. So the credit here, in fact, goes to the Egyptian officials who have been working on this issue about 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago.
This was a triumph, a legacy of the Mubarak time.
Yeah, definitely. It is the deal was agreed or negotiated. This document was negotiated during Mubarak time, but apparently it wasn't for the deal itself. It was about the regional dynamics and situation that didn't allow the signing of this agreement. So what has changed really is not the text of the deal itself. What has changed isn't Hamas or Fatah. What really changed is the regional situation. You have powers that are falling, others that are rising, and definitely this is a factor that influenced the choices and policies of Hamas and Fatah and made them ready to sign the same agreement that was negotiated by Mubarak's officials.
Okay, Mustafa Barghouti, what's your view on Egypt's role in all of this? Is it down to effectively the uprising across the Middle East?
Well, of course, Egypt has played a role during the last 2 years in trying to help reconciliate. But I think the revolution in Egypt and the big changes that took place in Egypt made it much more possible for Egypt to be a host of this agreement. Although the agreement itself, many parts of it has been already negotiated, but there was a certain addition, an important addition, which solved the fact, the acceptance of this new addition of several points has helped Hamas sign the agreement. They were abstaining from doing so. I think the Egyptian role after the Egyptian revolution has become more proactive, more productive. But let me also remind you that these points were worked out between us as Palestinians. We did mediate between Hamas and Fatah during the course of the last 6 weeks. And we managed to formulate a lot of points, most of the points as a matter of fact, but we needed a host, a country that could provide its support for the signing of this agreement in the light of huge opposition from Israel and some of those who don't want to see Palestinians unified. So that was a very important contribution from the side of Egypt.
But how much do you think it was down to Mubarak's efforts in the past? Because of course there was the perception that Egypt was always too hard on Hamas and too soft on Israel.
That might be one issue, but the other most important issue was that the previous regime was more vulnerable to pressures from outside, especially from Israel and the United States.
And that's what enabled it to happen.
And as thus, they were more vulnerable to pressures against the unity and against concluding this unity agreement. This is not what we see today. On the contrary, we see a strong resilience. We see strong determination that Egypt should play its regional and Arab role. And we see powerful input that was definitely conducive to helping us finalize the points we have managed to do between us, and then get Egyptian support for this agreement.
So Yaakov Katz in Jerusalem, where does this? No, let me just bring in. I'll bring you in a second. But let me just bring in Yaakov Katz initially. What's your view about this, and what's Israel's stance?
Well, I think first of all, Israel views positively the Egyptian involvement. The fact that Egypt is playing a key role here. Egypt is a country that Israel is peace with, is an ally of the State of Israel, and therefore Israel believes that Egyptian involvement can possibly bring some sort of positive outcome. I'd like to just add two other points. Firstly, I think we can't ignore the fact that the revolutions, the upheaval throughout the Middle East, and particularly in Syria, Hamas, as was stated before, had been offered such a deal, but turned it down, rejected it. Now it feels the ground shaking under its feet in Syria. Its sponsor, its host, Bashar Assad, might be falling. His regime might be coming to an end, and they feel the pressure. They also feel the pressure in Gaza. They see what's happening in Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, possibly in Iran, and they wonder, could this also happen to the Palestinians in Gaza? And therefore, unification of the Palestinian people, a possible diplomatic hope, is what could potentially secure their government. And thirdly, I think what we need to remember from an Israeli perspective is concern that this is not a genuine unity. There are major obstacles for the Palestinians. The West Bank, the Fatah is not allowing Hamas to redeploy in the West Bank. Hamas is not allowing Fatah to redeploy in Gaza. What type of unity is this? It seems to Israel to be more of a facade, more of an attempt to show unity to the world, which won't be as interested in the intricacies. Is it real? Is it not real? In an attempt to obtain statehood and skip over negotiations, which are critical from an Israeli perspective, to obtain peace. So I think that, unfortunately, what we're seeing is a house of cards that will come eventually tumbling down.
I'm going to bring in Mustafa Barghouti. Gamal Abdel Gawad, I'll come to you in just a second. Mustafa, let me just have your response to that first of all.
Well, I don't know why the Israelis are against Palestinian unity, and when the unity happens, they start to suspect it and say that it's a facade. I think the true Israeli position was declared by the Israeli foreign minister, who doesn't know how to speak diplomatically. He said, when Palestinians are divided, they are weak, and we want Palestinians to continue to be divided so they continue to be weak. In my opinion, the Israelis are missing the main point about this agreement. This agreement came out because of the will of the Palestinian people. There was a Palestinian revolution, small one maybe, but a real popular uprising demanding the end of this terrible division and demanding unity, because people realized that this would empower the Palestinians. And now we have a golden opportunity even for peace. For the first time, we have unified leadership. We can have unified negotiator. We can have unified structure that can make peace. I don't know why Israel is against that. And on the other hand, why the Israelis don't want us to be democratic, to have democracy. This is really amazing. I don't know how they speak about democracy in Libya and Syria and the rest of the Arab world, but when it comes to Palestine, we see double standard. Palestinians cannot be unified, Palestinians cannot have democracy, and they blame Mr. Abbas for us not being unified, and when we are unified, they blame him for us having unity.
Okay, Yaakov Katz, let me bring you in there. You were just trying to come in, and let me say to you, effectively, we've got here a unified front for the Palestinians, so, you know, isn't that representative of the whole of the Palestinian people?
I think that the greatest obstacle for peace in recent years was the fact that the Palestinian people have been divided, and I am optimistic of the fact that now they are reunited. The problem is, and I think we can't ignore this obstacle that still remains, is that Hamas is still bent on the destruction of the Jewish state, of the state of Israel. They have also refused to recognize Israel's right to exist. They refuse to recognize previous peace agreements between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Everyone is familiar. Everyone is familiar with the Oslo Accords. Everyone's familiar with the Y agreement. Everyone is familiar with all the previous peace agreements. In addition to that, the third point is Hamas is continuing its terrorist activity. And therefore, with that continuation, with the refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist, with continuing terrorist activity, I think that unfortunately it's impossible for there to be peace when your partner refuses to recognize your right to be in the land of Israel.
Gamal Gawad, I can see you want to jump in there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is not about what Israel is saying, it's about what Israel is doing. And the irony here is that it is a policy of Israel since the Oslo Agreement that really ended up causing this divide into among the Palestinians. If it weren't for the Israeli policies that undermined the legitimacy of the Palestinian leadership that was considered as moderate, who take a historical move toward reconciliation with Israel, such a kind of polarization and radicalization of Palestinian politics wouldn't have happened. Now, in fact, on the other hand, now the Palestinians, in fact, are facing a difficult situation where, yes, it's very difficult for the Palestinians to pursue armed resistance, while on the other hand, also the moderate Palestinian leadership of Mahmoud Abbas found that all venues or doors are closed for negotiated peace with Israel. So the Palestinians, anyway, are left with no choice but coming back again, even though they have a lot of differences, etc. But in the meantime, this is the only thing that is possible to do now, because other ways of dealing with Israel are closed. So Israel doesn't have really credibility criticizing Palestinians for being divided or for going towards unity. It is rather Israel is really responsible for first this freeze and deadlock in the peace process in the region, and also is responsible for the kind of dynamics of divide and rule that is taking place in the Palestinian community.
Okay, tell you what, let's have a listen to the Israeli Prime Minister, because the Israeli Prime Minister said the deal was a major setback for peace efforts. Benjamin Netanyahu making the remarks in the United Kingdom before he met with his British counterpart. That was on Wednesday. Let's have a listen.
What happened today in Cairo is a tremendous blow to peace and a great victory for terrorism. Because when Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, embraces Hamas, an organization that 2 days ago condemned the American action against bin Laden, praises bin Laden to the gills as some great martyr for emulation, this is a tremendous setback for peace and a great advance for terror. And the only way we can make peace is with our neighbors who want peace. Those who want to eliminate us, those who practice terror against us, are not partners for peace.
But once again, Yaakov Katz, I put to you that here we are faced with a unified Palestinian front, and those words from Benjamin Netanyahu aren't the kind of words that are going to encourage any progress in any shape or form.
Well, I think what we need to keep in mind is the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu's government was the first government in Israeli history to impose a moratorium to freeze construction in the West Bank settlements in an effort to get Abbas to come back to the peace table, which he refused to do. Unfortunately, the 2 years of deadlock that we've seen in negotiations is not because Israel's refusing peace, but because the Palestinians have refused to come and sit down across the table from the Israelis. And I think that unfortunately, again, as I said before, Hamas's continued strategy of terrorism, its efforts to continue to try to eliminate and destroy Israel, is what will be the greatest impediment for peace. And I think that if we really want to see a genuine peace, and I know that that's what Israel wants, it is in Israel's strategic interest for there to be a stable, secure Palestinian state next to it, and for there to be the two-state solution. But we can't allow for a situation that a terrorist entity which is bent on our destruction will be the government of that state that lies or rests next to the state of Israel.
Mustafa Barghouti, when you listen to those words and the words of Benjamin Netanyahu, and as somebody once said, it's hard to make something dead even more dead, but perhaps in a sense that's where we are with the peace process.
Well, I'm so sorry to say that what you hear from your guest from Israel and from Netanyahu is the same language, the language of misrepresentation, I would say lies, and propaganda. He says that Israel did a moratorium on settlement activities, but this moratorium is gone. The settlement activities are happening every day, everywhere. The man who killed peace and the potential for peace is Mr. Netanyahu by insisting on continuing settlement activities.
But it doesn't help if Hamas keep firing their rockets,
the government, excuse me, the government of Israel is the one that has conducted, it includes war criminals in it, like Ehud Barak, who was condemned for war crimes by Goldstone report. The Israeli government includes settlers like Lieberman, who is violating every international law. We could also say that the Israeli government should expel these people from its structure before we talk to them. But the Israelis are failing to see the reality. The reality is that this Palestinian Unity Agreement provides a great opportunity for peace. They haven't heard what Mr. Mash'al even said. He spoke about two-state solution. All Palestinians are ready today for a two-state solution, accepting 22% of the land, which is less than half of what the United Nations decided. And yet Israel does not want that. In reality, the side that is creating occupation and the side that is creating apartheid and racial discrimination against the Palestinians for the last 63 years is the Israeli government.
Okay, but let me just put this to you.
And they try to claim,
because we need to move it on. But I just want to put this to you: it doesn't help if Hamas keep firing rockets and refuse to recognize the right of Israel to exist.
Hamas does not shoot any rockets on Israel. Hamas is committed totally today to the ceasefire and committed totally to non-violence today. It was Israel that provoked Hamas several times to have a reaction. But today we have a ceasefire, and Israel itself admits that there is a complete ceasefire. So who is committing violence? Who is committing discrimination? Are we occupying Israel, or Israel is occupying us? Who dismissed half of the Palestinian people from their land? It is Israel. But the Israelis try to convince themselves all the time that they are the victims in this conflict. Excuse me, you are in this case the oppressors. You are, in this case, the ones who are practicing the worst system of apartheid in human history.
Okay,
and time has come to stop that.
We've been all through these arguments before. Let me bring in Gamal Abdel Gawad. I mean, listen to all of this this discussion that's going on. It doesn't sound like anything has changed before. We're not any further forward at all, are we?
Well, in practical terms, in fact, there's no longer been much of a difference between Hamas and Fatah vis-a-vis the policy regarding Israel. Both sides talking about the Palestinian state on the 1967 borders. Hamas is no longer fighting. Hamas is observing the truce with Israel very carefully now for a long period of time. And on the other hand, the Palestinian Authority is no longer negotiating with Israel because Israel is not ready for negotiation, apparently. So in fact, the two sides, even though they are coming from different ideological backgrounds, but in policy-wise, they became very close in that regard. And this is what is really could be considered as an opportunity for peace in between the Palestinians and Israel. However, I'm not that optimistic because I would rather see this move toward reconciliation as an attempt by both Palestinian sides to bring the Palestinian house in order. The divide between Fatah and Hamas, West Bank and Gaza, has really damaged Palestinian interest and the Palestinian politics. So this is an attempt to bring order to the Palestinian house. Any serious talk about further or some sort of change in the Palestinian-Israeli relations is something to be perhaps expected in the far future, not in the near future. It's very unlikely for the peace process to be relaunched again in the midst of this kind of trouble and changes and revolutions in the Middle East. So it's the only thing that the Palestinians can do now is about Palestinian house, Palestinian.
Okay. I need to move it on. I need
politics.
to move on because we're coming towards the end of the program. I need to give our other two guests a chance to have their final say. Yaakov Katz, you'll know, of course, in September, the Palestinians are going to the UN to lobby for recognition of a Palestinian state. The whole game is changing now, isn't it? The whole game is changing. It's time for Israel to come to the party.
Well, I think without a doubt, I think that this facade of unity within the Palestinian people is what will present to the world as if there's no longer this divide and therefore they are ready for statehood. I would argue that they're not yet at that stage because they're not able to implement this unity plan. And I think that there's just one very important point that we've missed. And as my Egyptian friend said before, that they for a long time have been holding by the truce. Just 4 weeks ago, an anti-tank missile was fired at an Israeli school children's bus along the Gaza border by Hamas. Hamas is not today might be committed to a truce, but Hamas just a few weeks ago fired an anti-tank missile at a school children's bus. Several days before that, they were firing long-range rockets into Israeli cities. This is not an entity that we can say, just 3 weeks of sudden quiet, that this is someone who we can trust, someone we can count on, that will ensure that our security here in Israel is accounted for in a future peace deal and in the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Okay,
and I fear that Israel does not yet have those assurances, despite the unity deal that has now been fulfilled.
Over to you. Mustafa Barghouti, have your say now.
Sir, I think the problem with the Israelis is that they are stuck with the past. They cannot see the future. They don't realize that these revolutions that took place in the Arab world have changed the balance of power and will change it even further. They don't realize that we are determined as Palestinians not only to have a state, but to have a democratic state, a prosperous state, a state where we all accept democracy as a form of our relationship. That is the essence of this new agreement. If Israel cared about peace, it would realize that the best peace that can last and be stable is the one between two democracies. What's wrong with Palestinians being democratic? This is what this agreement means. It also means that all Palestinians are ready for two-state solution. And let me tell you, no colonial power ever in the human history decided that those who are under colony can become independent. It's not your decision. It's our decision, the Palestinians. We are determined to be independent from your oppression, from occupation, and from apartheid. Time has come for Palestine to be free. Time has come for Palestinians to have their own state and sovereignty, and time for us has come to become a democracy. Israel cannot stop that, will not be able to stop that, but the sooner they accept us as equal human beings and as equal in the right of having dignity, human rights and democracy, the sooner we can get peace altogether.
Mr. Barghouti, the time for us has come to the time has come for us, I should say, to end the programme. Unfortunately, we appreciate all of your time and perspectives on this. Gamal Abdel Gawad, Mustafa Barghouti and Yaakov Katz, thanks very much indeed. And thanks for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Do drop us an email. It'd be good to hear your comments and or suggestions about future programmes. The address is insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.